Mine are so much more visual. I wanted to talk about James Gunn's writing because I've been watching a TV show called Peacemaker, a superhero-y TV show that's on HBO Max. But James Gunn, who has helmed the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, does such a good job of writing ensembles, and within those ensembles, giving characters really, really nice, juicy bits that tell you so much about their character. Yeah, that's kind of what I had so far.
Yeah. I sent you the thing that I had, which was kind of a
Yes.
5 things to think about when you're making a character. Look, I'm no expert, right? But I've done the research and, we've done the schooling and we've read a ton. So I feel like I'm well positioned to at least synthesize this into something that's easy to say and for folks to kind of remember and think about. When you look at all these different articles on the internet, and many of them written by people who aren't notable writers, but who have a good handle on what it takes to make a good character. They're all saying kind of, variations on the same song, So I said, all right, well, let me put together my variation on that song.
Right.
And that's really all we're doing, right? So like you may have a way that makes more sense to you to internalize this, but that's fine. So the thing about really strong main characters seems to be these 5 things. So I'll just pitch them to you real quick. So the first one is they desire one thing, but they require something else. And usually they're not aware of that. So like and you could literally take, I think, almost any main character and sort of apply this. I was thinking about Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. Not to say that is some great character, but I think it's a very strong character because that character has a point of view. I consider a strong character to be someone who's so well expressed that the reader or the viewer can think about an action and be able to definitively say that character would or would not do that. So like, would Elle Woods, pull a knife on somebody? No, that's not a thing that Elle Woods is going to do. Is Elle Woods going to compliment someone on their hair? Yes. Are they going to give them advice on, skincare? And are they going to give them legal advice when they're in trouble? Probably, so there's a whole range of things that I didn't originate that character, but having experienced that character on the screen, I know kind of what they're going to do. So the desiring one thing and requiring something else. If you look at the first movie, Legally Blonde, what her desire was to get together with, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was the guy who went to Harvard Law, and he was breaking it off with her, right? And so she desired to stay with him, and that's why she crammed for the LSAT and scored this ridiculously high score on it, because she is a very smart person who just wasn't applying herself in that way. But the thing that she required, because once she got to that school and sort of made herself in that person's orbit, and he still rejected her, it turned out that she required something else, which was this purpose in life, which was to help people, and she used the legal system to help people. So she desired one thing, and that was unrequited, and she discovered through the course of that story what she actually required. So, I mean, that's like the first thing,
Yeah. Yes, I think that, and I'm talking about this character, Peacemaker. He desires freedom, which is his big thing. He wants freedom for everyone, but doesn't care how many men, women, or children he has to kill to get freedom. But he requires connection from his father, and from other people, like true connection. And I think that it's a very good, I think that you've hit on it, Art. You've done it. You've done it. That's
Huzzah. So that's number one. The second one is, and these aren't in any order, by the way, this is just sort of how I was thinking about it. So the second one that I have is their imperfections make them compelling. You see the word compelling used a lot in these different articles. Your main character has to be compelling. They have to be interesting. That's all true. But what does compelling really mean? It's almost like when you see a train wreck and you cannot look away. That is a form of compelling. If you see a beautiful person walk into your field of vision and you're transfixed, you cannot take your eye off of that person, that is a form of compelling. If you've got a stand-up comedian who is incredibly funny, that is a form of compelling. If you have a stand-up comedian who is bombing hard, that can also be compelling. So it's really just about, so it's about capturing your interest as much as anything. And, not having them be perfect people, they need to be imperfect people, because the imperfections are where that attention is going to fall. And they may not even be aware of their imperfections, or they may be hyper aware of their imperfections. So, for example, we could use Hamlet. Hamlet's imperfection, he has many, but he is indecisive, right? So that's one of his bigger ones. So he's got this, and people might think, well, he's crazy, right? I've heard that before. But he may just be overly grief-stricken, right? His father just died, ostensibly by murder. His mother remarried in a ridiculously quick turnaround, according to him.
Yes.
Married into the family. Like, there's a lot going on, right? There's a lot to process. So he may just be completely overwhelmed by grief, rather than, oh, he's nuts, right? To me, it doesn't matter. I think it's largely irrelevant, because his actions are informed by the depth of his despair. But he has this kind of murderous sense about him, which of course comes out at the very end. But when he's presented with the opportunity to confront directly the king or his mother, he often kind of steers away from it. And then, when he's in soliloquy, he sort of either lambasts himself for not acting more quickly, or actually is trying to reason it out, right? To be or not to be, that is the question. It's about, am I going to kill this guy or not? And he's really struggling with that. So that is an imperfection. And it's funny too, because when he finally does sort of take the moment and act is when he kills Polonius, right? He grabs a sword and he's like, he's behind the arras, and he stabs. Like, he doesn't know what the hell's going on. He's just like, there he is, I'm gonna kill him. And like, whoa, you've been, waffling back and forth for an hour now. And all of a sudden you're just gonna grab a sword and stab him. So these are the imperfections that make him very compelling. It's hard to look away from Hamlet, because he's just, in many ways, he's his own worst enemy.
Yes. And I see the same thing, when we're talking about James Gunn's writing of Peacemaker for this TV show. I mean, I think I love going from Hamlet to Peacemaker.
Hey man, it's all good.
It's all good. I mean, am I putting James Gunn? Yeah, I am putting him at a Shakespearean level. I love that guy's writing. I love his films. But, Peacemaker is so abrasive and sort of he's just a giant man-child, a giant alpha man-child. And it's very compelling to see what a wreck he is. Of course, it's in, funny and humorous ways because of the nature of the television show. But that's what keeps us going, is because we know that he requires something else. We know what he requires, but it's the imperfections and his imperfections that keep us watching to see, when is the light going to go off for him? When is it going to happen to change his outward behavior? Because he knows his soliloquies that he has in the show, usually when he's in bed crying. But it's his imperfections that are making him compelling.
Yeah, no, that's good. So that's the second one. The third one that I've got is something essential is threatened. So you look at movies like Armageddon or Independence Day, right? These giant blockbuster movies, they have kind of an external plot reason where something essential is threatened. The China Syndrome was a good example of that too, back in the late 70s, early 80s, with Jack Lemmon and Jane Fonda. They're trying to prevent a nuclear meltdown. Outbreak is another good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
So anything where there's an obvious threat to an external structure, Star Wars. I mean, you can pretty much, pull a name out of a hat and you can find that. On the internal, it's a little harder to dramatize that, but internally, most of literary fiction has like an existential crisis where a character feels like they aren't themselves anymore because this thing occurred. Maybe it's a divorce, maybe they got fired from their job, but something that they consider essential is being threatened. And so they have to act, and by doing so, they change. That's the fourth one. So like the essential thing that's threatened is probably the easiest thing for us as writers to pluck out, because we can just throw obstacles at the character, like, things are too stable. Let's do this to him. Like, let's mess with him. And I feel bad about it, right? But like messing with your characters is an integral part of writing fiction.
Oh yeah. I remember the first time I heard that was, I think Vonnegut had said something like that, make all of the worst things happen to your character, it gives the audience an opportunity to see what they're made of.
Right, because their response to the stress is what helps to dramatize who they are and why they are compelling, and why we should care.
Right.
I think if you throw something at a character and they turtle, or they don't respond to it well in a way that's interesting, then maybe you've got the wrong character as your main character. That's a No, I'm serious. Yeah. That's a possibility.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Gatsby's a really good example of that, because I think a lot of people assume that Jay Gatsby is the main character in The Great Gatsby, right? He's right there in the title, but he's not. Gatsby's not the main character. The main character is Nick, the narrator. And the reason for that is that Gatsby doesn't have an arc where he changes. Gatsby starts off like the linear transition to this guy. He's kind of like a Don Draper right before Don Draper, but he had this military career. He had met this girl, and it's a lost love opportunity, Daisy, and he just couldn't bag the girl, basically. And so now he kind of pivots to this kind of shady criminal dealings to get a bunch of money. He very successfully gets all that money and buys a house across the bay to impress her, and then worms his way into their social scene and basically tries to steal this married woman away from her husband. Now, her husband's a dick, right? But they're married, and they clearly do care for each other, Tom and Daisy. So it's like, and he almost gets away with it, right? Because he has that kind of garden scene in the rain, and that worked really well. And she looks like she's starting to kind of come over to him. And it's just when they are fleeing this sort of terrible, afternoon in the city, and Gatsby hits this woman with his car. Oh, should I do spoiler alerts? This book was written 100 years ago. Is that okay? I think you're. Am I okay? All right,
I think you're okay.
Yeah,
you're okay there.
He runs over a random woman, doesn't stop, right? And then that kind of sours Daisy on the whole thing, because she's all about comfort and security. She's a hothouse flower, But if he hadn't run over that woman, maybe he would have pulled it off. Maybe he would have gotten the girl. And then, of course, the husband of the woman he ran over exacted revenge and killed him in the swimming pool. So there you go. That's Gatsby. But notice he doesn't change. Like, he doesn't change.
Right.
He starts the book wanting Daisy. He ends the book wanting Daisy. The only difference is he tried, failed, and now he's dead. So it's Nick who actually has this arc where he changes his perspective from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. So that's what makes the main character, is the fact that they act, and by doing so, they change. They have to change.
Yes. Yeah. And that's one of those things that I've really tried to work on the most, is to have something. I'm at a point in a story that I'm writing right now. It's about 2,000 words that I'm ready to share with you, because I just sort of in the last day figured out how to have that change. And I'm excited to sort of see if you think I did it. And I'm already thinking you probably won't, but that's what rewrites are for. No,
I want to read it. That sounds good.
Me.
I do.
You know me. It's a lot of gimmick, and then there's a little story. And so I'm trying to get a little bit better at being like, this is a legitimate story.
Look, a lot of same here. My gimmick was pretty language, right? Yours was sci-fi premises. Like, we were both doing the same comfortable avoidance. We've talked about it before. And I feel like the course of this writing workshop that we've kind of kicked off has cured us both of thinking that was the right approach. So maybe we're not doing it correctly, but the scales have fallen from our eyes. We definitely see where the problems were. And that's so liberating, because now we're not going to repeat those same mistakes over and over again. That we've examined what's going on. And that's why I feel really empowered and encouraged by the work that we're doing.
Yeah, and it's funny, because I'm looking at these 5, your list of things for character, and I'm going over the story that I just wrote in my head, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm there with that. Yeah, I think I got there once. So yeah, maybe what'll happen is we'll leave today. I'll send it to you, and we can talk about it next time to see if I hit those marks.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to read it. There's one more I got to cover, and it's the main character is uniquely skilled to tackle the central problem. And so if you watch movies and you sort of have this everyman kind of stumble into a situation, let's take Die Hard. It's a great example. John McClane isn't just some schlub, right? He's a New York City cop. He has a gun.
Yeah.
He knows how criminals work. So he is uniquely suited to help to repel that terrorist attack or that theft opportunity at Nakatomi Plaza. And you'll see that where it's almost like characters are accidentally perfect at, trying to solve the problem at hand. It's not an accident. We need someone who is well suited.
Right. And if you have Die Hard without John McClane, but perhaps Michael Cera, that's called a comedy, and it's probably still very good.
Right. So if they do have, yeah. So like, what's the Scott Pilgrim versus the World?
Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah. Which I love that movie. He is uniquely suited to deal with that, because of his musical background and his point of view. I think a more self-aware character may have just sort of extricated himself from the various X's battles, but his blinders were on, and that's why he continued through those encounters, and he was able to sort of emerge victorious from each one. But I think most people in that situation would have gone, "This is too much trouble. This is too much risk. We're good."
Exactly. Just a quick text. I'm sorry I can't see you anymore. The Guild of the X's or whatever it was called is just a little tough. Maybe we'll get coffee at some point in the future. Goodbye. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so many of these stories can be resolved without conflict. And it's because of the character's drive, ambition, or that sense of what is essential that's being threatened. You think of the movie Falling Down, which I hadn't thought about in a long time, with Michael Douglas. Yeah. And if you haven't seen, anybody out there, if you haven't seen this movie, do yourself a favor, find it. I'm sure it's on one of the free streaming things at this point. But he's basically just a guy who snapped. And and I don't want to spoil any of it because it's a really exciting sort of day. And the whole thing is supposed to be one day in the life of a guy. It's really his very worst day and how it plays out. And it's tremendous, but he could have opted out of that set of experiences, certainly in the first act, by just being more calm and reasonable. But because of his frame of mind, that really wasn't where he was. And so he made choices that set him on this path. It's just truly exceptional. Falling Down is the name of the movie.
I should rewatch that. I think I will. Yes.
So that's the 5. They desire one thing and require something else. Their imperfections make them compelling. Something essential is threatened. They're uniquely skilled to tackle the central problem, and they act, and by doing so, they change. So that's pretty much the main character. All right, well, problem solved. Go knock it out, Tim.
Problem done. Yeah, it's easy. Good. All you need to do is just put a couple of check boxes by this, get your next piece out, check them off one by one. Instant Nobel Prize.
Exactly. No, but we've talked about this a lot, where having a target makes it possible to hit the target. So I feel like before this moment, before I had done this research, I kind of had an idea of what a main character ought to be. But like you had said earlier, they're basically all just versions of me. And many of them didn't even have a name. So I'm like, well, let's tell a story about a person that people can identify with.
Right.
I think I'm excited to try this out now that I have this kind of framework.
Yeah, it's just another arrow in your quiver, or whatever they call that thing, to be able to use when you're trying to hit that target of having a finished piece that you feel good about.
So do you want me to use this when I'm reading that story that you send over? Do you want to kind of use this as the filter to look at that main character?
Yeah, I think it would probably be helpful, because then we could sort of circle back and talk about it.
Done.